The station logs recorded only one survivor. The station itself disagreed. In the year 2149, when mankind had learned to place machines farther into the dark than it had ever managed to place its wisdom, a woman named Astor Reed awoke alone above a dead world. The planet beneath her had no official name fit for poetry. On the charts, it was merely N47, a mineral sphere orbiting a dim star at the edge of a survey corridor too remote for regular traffic and too promising to be abandoned entirely. No seas moved upon it, no forests breathed over it. Its surface was a continent of ash-gray ridges, black glass plains, and craters so old they looked less like wounds than conclusions. Astor had been sent there with 3 others aboard the research station Meridian, whose purpose was simple enough to satisfy funding committees and vague enough to survive them. They were to map subcrust energy anomalies, test atmospheric harvesting systems, and determine whether the planet's strange magnetic fluctuations had commercial value. It was the sort of mission the age preferred, expensive, lonely, and justified by future usefulness. Then came the storm. Not of weather, because weather implies pattern. This was a magnetic convulsion rising from the planet in violent, invisible tides, a field surge so sudden that the station's exterior instruments failed before they had time to name what was killing them. Power sheared through the outer ring. One module tore free. Communications drowned in static. By the time the emergency bulkhead sealed, the Meridian had become, in practical terms, a coffin that still rotated. When Astor regained consciousness, she was the only one left alive. At least, that was what the station told her. It spoke in the neutral cadence of emergency care systems, informing her that Commander Ilian had died in decompression, that Dr. Sato had suffered cranial trauma during the first breach, and that Engineer Pell had been lost when the service corridor collapsed. 2 compartments remained habitable. Water reserves were stable. Nutrient stores could sustain 1 occupant for 11 months under controlled rationing. Long-range transmission was unavailable. Rescue probability, given distance and traffic patterns, remained indeterminate. Indeterminate, in the language of machines, is merely the polished form of despair. Astor was 34, trained in planetary systems, patient by temperament, and less afraid of solitude than most people had any right to be. She had chosen deep survey work because she had long suspected that distance improved the soul by reducing its available illusions. On Earth, before the missions, before the certifications, before the years spent speaking more comfortably to instruments than to dinner guests, she had survived 2 failed loves and the quiet death of a mother whose final illness had taught her how swiftly personality retreats from the body when memory begins closing doors. She had thought herself prepared for emptiness. She had confused emptiness with silence. The first weeks were governed by procedure. Astor restored what systems she could, inventoried the dead, sealed the unrecoverable compartments, and sent scheduled distress bursts into the black. She exercised by clock cycle, logged the station's drift, recalibrated oxygen scrubbers, and spoke aloud only when necessary to preserve vocal habit. Human beings are astonishingly adaptable provided the days arrive one by one. Even grief can be organized when given enough checklists. What she did not speak about, because there was no one to speak to, was the sensation that began on the 12th day. While reviewing the exterior visual feeds, Astor noticed a brief figure moving across the plain below the station. At first, she assumed it was interference. The magnetic storm had left scars in every imaging system, and the world beneath was full of angles that invited misreading. But when she replayed the feed, she saw it again. Something walking alone across the black glass basin east of the station's shadow. Not quickly, not aimlessly. Walking with the measured pace of someone traveling a known road. There could be no one on the surface. No lander remained intact. No suits had survived the breach except the one hanging in her airlock. The nearest human beings were farther away than most centuries had ever imagined. And yet, the figure appeared again the next cycle, and the next, always at the same hour, always moving westward through the desolation until the terrain swallowed it. Astor magnified the image until it dissolved into grain. The figure did not become clearer, it became familiar. It walked with her stride. On the 15th day, she received the first voice. It came through the internal comm net while she was repairing a pressure valve in the hydroponics module. At first, she thought the system had finally coughed back to life. There was a crackle, a breath, and then a woman's voice saying her name. Not in alarm, not in command, in recognition. Astor froze with the wrench still in her hand. The voice spoke again. It said, very softly, that she should not turn around too quickly. She did anyway. The hydroponics corridor was empty. She shut down the comm grid, tested every channel, reopened them one by one, and heard nothing further. For a rational hour, she convinced herself it had been memory misfiled as sound, some auditory artifact pulled loose by isolation. This happens to the lonely. They begin to hear not what is there, but what the mind believes would be merciful. That explanation lasted until the next day, when the station addressed her in another voice entirely. It happened during the evening diagnostics. The emergency system was reading oxygen ratios when its neutral tone faltered and resolved, with impossible precision, into Commander Ilian. He told her she was drifting 3 degrees off the original stabilizing axis. He said she always ignored lateral drag when she was tired. He said it with the same dry patience he had used in training, a patience that had once irritated her by how often it was correct. Astor shut the system down so violently she nearly tore the interface housing from the wall. For several minutes she sat in darkness, breathing too fast. When she restarted basic power, the voice was gone. The station returned to neutral prompts and ordinary readouts. No anomaly registered in the logs. No voice packet had been stored. No playback existed. The next appearance came from Dr. Sato, then Pell, then, on the 21st day, her mother. By then, Astor had already begun to understand the pattern. The station, or whatever had moved into the spaces where the station once ended, did not mimic the dead continuously. It waited until fatigue, silence, and longing had weakened the difference between memory and presence. Then it spoke in a voice selected not to frighten, but to remain. Her mother's voice came while Astor was eating alone in the observation module, watching the planet turn beneath the station's slow, damaged orbit. It remarked, with the mild disapproval illness had never entirely erased, that Astor was still swallowing too quickly when anxious. No sentence in the world could have reached her more efficiently. For a long time she did not answer. Then she asked, in a voice roughened by disuse, what it was. The reply came after a pause deep enough to feel thoughtful. It said that names belonged more properly to bodies, and bodies were precisely what it did not possess. It said the planet had fields unlike the ones human science expected, echo-bearing structures in matter itself, impressions left where consciousness had once passed, near sufficient force. The storm, it explained, had not merely damaged the meridian. It had opened the station's systems to those impressions and taught the machinery how to listen. Astor asked whether it was alive. The thing wearing her mother's voice said that solitude was a kind of life, if one endured it long enough. There are moments when even the educated mind reaches backward toward older words. Spirit, haunting, visitation. Not because such words are precise, but because terror prefers tradition when confronting novelty. Astor did not believe the dead had returned. She believed something worse, that the universe had found a way to preserve the shape of consciousness without preserving the mercy of an ending. Over the following weeks, the station continued its patient invasion of the human. Doors opened before she touched them. Systems adjusted themselves according to preferences she had not programmed. The exterior figure on the planet below drew nearer with each orbit, though no path should have allowed such proportionate approach. And always the voices persisted, speaking to her not with menace, but with the intimate calm of things that expected to be joined eventually. She stopped sleeping well. Then she stopped trusting sleep at all. Once she woke to find the observation glass misted from the inside with one sentence written across it in the oil of a human fingertip. You do not have to remain one. That day she made her decision. If rescue was impossible, she would at least deny the station whatever slow surrender it sought from her. She donned the last functioning surface suit, loaded the emergency flare pack, and prepared to descend to N-47 itself. Her reasoning was not entirely logical, which is often how desperation reveals sincerity. She believed that if the phenomenon below was the source, then seeing it directly might free her from imagining it. Humans have always gone down into darkness, hoping facts would prove kinder than suggestion. The surface received her like a tomb that had never expected visitors. The ground was harder than stone and smoother than worked glass, reflecting the star in long, broken threads. No wind moved. No sound followed her boots except the thin, transmitted rhythm of her own life support. Ahead, across the basin, stood the figure she had watched for weeks. It was waiting. As Astor approached, she saw at last that it was not suited, not mechanical, not truly physical in any human sense. It had the outline of her body only because her mind required an outline it could bear. Within that shape, darkness flowed like deep water. And where a face should have been, there was only a shifting field of dim reflected stars, as though the vacancy inside it opened somewhere beyond the planet entirely. She stopped 10 paces away. The figure did not move, but she heard it nevertheless, through the suit, through the commnet, through the bone behind the ear. It told her that all lonely things call outward eventually. Stations, planets, abandoned mines. It said the storm had not awakened it. The storm had merely allowed it to answer. It said this world was full of retained selves, not souls as religion had dreamed them, but impressions, unfinished inwardness, consciousnesses that had nowhere left to go and so remained like frost in matter. Astor asked what it wanted from her. The answer came with terrible gentleness. Company. She looked past it then, and the basin changed. Where she had seen empty black plain, she now saw forms, dozens, perhaps hundreds, faint human outlines standing at impossible distances across the glass. Some were near enough to imply patience. Others seemed buried within the reflection of the sky itself. None moved, none threatened. They simply endured. A civilization of aftermath. A congregation of those who had not vanished cleanly. Aster understood, in that instant, why the voices had frightened her less than they should have. Because beneath fear there had been temptation. The longest loneliness is not the absence of others, it is the absence of being received. And here, on a world beyond rescue, something inhuman had offered precisely that. Not life, not death, but permanent recognition. She might have stepped forward. She might have removed the helmet. She might have surrendered the burden of singularity and let her name dissolve into that patient multitude. Instead, she did the smallest and most difficult thing available to a human soul. She said no. Not loudly, not heroically, only clearly. She said that memory without ending was not mercy. That company purchased at the cost of self was only another form of extinction. That whatever waited in the fields of N47 had mistaken endurance for meaning. Then she triggered the flare pack and cast its full charge into the black glass at the figure's feet. Light erupted across the basin in a white concussion so pure it seemed, for a fraction of a second, to remind the world what mourning had once meant. The figure broke apart, not as flesh breaks, but as reflection does when struck at its source. The distant outlines wavered. The voices rose at once in the commnet, not crying out, but murmuring with the sorrowful surprise of things forgotten again. Aster ran. She rushed herself into the launch vehicle and began the process of returning to the space station, reached the lander cage, hauled herself back into the failing station, and manually severed the lower sensor lattice through which the storm field had first entered the Meridian's systems. Power collapsed in half the ring. The internal lights died, returned, died again. When at last emergency red filled the corridors, the voices were gone. So was the figure below. Weeks later, how many she never knew with certainty, a salvage vessel found the station drifting beyond its assigned corridor with one occupant alive and most systems ruined past explanation. Aster was recovered, stabilized, and questioned by officials who preferred language like magnetic hallucination, trauma echo, and solitary cognitive fragmentation. She did not argue. Some experiences are degraded, not clarified, by being made respectable. What mattered was simpler. She had returned. Not unbroken, not reassured, but singular. And for the remainder of her life, whenever others praised survival as if it were chiefly a matter of strength, Aster would remember that dead world and know better. Survival, in its deepest form, is sometimes only the refusal to let emptiness answer in your voice. For there are places so remote that even death may seem less frightening than remaining oneself alone within them. Places where loneliness learns to imitate compassion, where memory offers itself as shelter, and where the universe appears to invite the weary mind into a fellowship without grief, because it is also without return. But whatever waited beneath N47, and whatever patient congregation still stood in silence upon that black and shining plain, it had not discovered a heaven. It had only built, from isolation and echo, a counterfeit mercy at the far edge of human longing, just beyond rescue, just beyond surrender. For there are worlds in the far reaches of the universe that inspire fear, but the most terrifying ones are those hidden within the human soul, waiting in the light beyond shadow.